Hannah Sorensen packed her belongings into a canvas sack on the 15th of October, 1886, 3 weeks after they buried her father and 1 day after her stepmother told her to leave. "The farm is mine now," Edith had said, her steel-gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch the cruelty across her face. "Your father's will was clear. Everything goes to his wife. You're not his wife. You're not even my blood. Find somewhere else to be. This is my home. I was born in this house. It was your home. Now it's mine. I've arranged for Mr. Harmon to drive you to town tomorrow morning. After that, you're not my concern." Hannah had spent the night packing what she could carry: clothes, a few tools, the small wooden box that held her mother's wedding ring and a lock of her father's hair, the quilt her grandmother had made before arthritis took her fingers. She had 23 cents to her name, saved from selling eggs that her stepmother now claimed belonged to the farm. 23 cents, a canvas sack, and the first snow of the season falling outside the window. Mr. Harmon drove her to town as promised, a silent journey in which neither of them spoke. He dropped her at the general store and drove away without looking back, his obligation to Edith Sorensen fulfilled. Hannah stood on the wooden sidewalk with her sack at her feet and watched the snow fall and tried to think of what to do next. She had no family in town. Her mother had been an only child. Her father's people all back in Minnesota, addresses she didn't know and couldn't afford to reach even if she did. The boarding house wanted 50 cents a night. The church offered charity, but charity meant working for Mrs. Patterson, and Mrs. Patterson had a reputation for working her charity cases until they dropped. She was considering which doorway might offer the best shelter for sleeping when she heard a voice behind her. "You're Niels Sorensen's girl." She turned. An old man was watching her from the bench outside the store, wrapped in furs that looked older than she was, his white beard reaching to his chest and his eyes sharp despite the wrinkles that surrounded them. He's dead now." "I heard. Good man, your father. Helped me once when my mule went lame. Didn't ask for nothing in return." The old man gestured at the sack at her feet. "That woman throw you out?" "She says the farm is hers now." "Law says she's right. Don't make it just." He stood, slower than a young man, but steadier than his age suggested. "Name's Jim Bridger. Not the famous one. I just borrowed the name when I was young and stupid. You got somewhere to go?" "No." "You got money for a room?" 23 cents. Old Jim Bridger nodded, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She followed because she had no better options, because the snow was falling harder and the temperature was dropping. And the old man was the first person who had spoken to her with anything like kindness since her father took sick. He led her out of town and into the hills to the west, following a trail that wasn't visible until you were already on it, climbing steadily as the afternoon light faded. "Stay with me, because what old Jim showed her is the reason Hannah never burned a log, while everyone else in the territory went through 20 cords trying to survive the same winter." The cave entrance was hidden behind a fall of rock that looked natural, but had clearly been arranged by human hands. You couldn't see it from the trail. You couldn't see it from anywhere unless you knew exactly where to look. Old Jim pulled aside a screen of dead brush and revealed an opening in the hillside, maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall, darkness beyond. "Found this place 40 years ago," he said, leading her inside. "Never told nobody about it. Too useful to share with people who'd just ruin it." The tunnel was narrow, but not cramped, the walls smooth from water that had carved them centuries before. It ran straight into the hillside for maybe 30 feet, then opened into a chamber that made Hannah stop and stare. The cave was perhaps 40 feet across and 20 feet high, the ceiling curved like the inside of a skull. The floor was mostly flat stone, worn smooth by water and time. And in the center of the chamber, a pool of water steamed gently, the surface rippling with heat that rose from somewhere deep in the earth. Hot spring, old Jim said. 104 degrees year-round, never changes, never stops. The water comes up from below, heats the air, keeps the whole cave warm as a house with a fire going. He gestured at the walls, the ceiling, the steam that rose from the pool. 58 degrees in here, even when it's 40 below outside. I've spent winters in this cave when I was too old or too broke to go anywhere else. Never needed a fire, never burned a stick of wood. The earth does all the work. Hannah walked to the edge of the pool and held her hand over the water. The heat rose against her palm, steady and constant, the temperature of a warm bath. The air in the cave was humid but comfortable, the chill of the October afternoon already fading from her bones. Why are you showing me this? Because your father helped me when he didn't have to. Because that woman who threw you out is the kind of person who makes me ashamed to be part of the same species. Old Jim sat down on a boulder near the pool, his old joints creaking. And because I'm 73 years old and I'm not going to use this place much longer, somebody should know about it, somebody who will use it right. You're giving me a cave? I'm showing you a cave. What you do with it is your business. He pointed at different parts of the chamber. Sleeping area over there. The rock holds the heat from the pool. Storage back in that alcove. Stays dry, never freezes. The pool itself is good for drinking if you take the water from the edge where it's cooler. There's an air shaft up through the ceiling that keeps the steam from building up too thick. Hannah looked around the space that could become her home. It was primitive, nothing like the house she had grown up in, but it was warm and dry, and it was being offered to her by someone who owed her nothing. What about winter? Real winter? I spent the winter of '62 in here, when the snow was so deep the wolves couldn't hunt. Stayed at 56 degrees the whole time. The spring never stops, the heat never fades. You seal the entrance with hides or canvas. You sleep near the pool. You'll be warmer than anyone in town with their stoves and their firewood. She moved in that night, bringing her canvas sack and her 23 cents into a cave that had been waiting 40 years for someone to need it. Old Jim helped her gather materials for sealing the entrance, a frame of branches, a cover of canvas he had stored in the back alcove, strips of hide to close the gaps. By the time darkness fell, the cave was sealed and warm, the steam from the pool filling the air with moisture that softened the cold she had carried in her lungs. She slept on a bed of dried grass near the edge of the pool, the stone beneath her warm from the water that flowed past, the air around her humid and comfortable. She slept better than she had since her father died, warm and safe in a cave that the winter couldn't touch. The work of making the cave livable took most of November. She gathered more dried grass for bedding and insulation. She built a simple shelf system in the storage alcove using flat stones and branches. She created a cooking area near the entrance where she could build small fires when she needed them for food, though she rarely did. The hot spring water was hot enough to cook eggs and soften dried meat, and she learned to prepare most of her meals using nothing but the constant heat that rose from below. She hunted when she could, setting snares for rabbits in the hills around the cave. She gathered what the land offered: late berries, roots, The inner bark of certain trees that old Jim had taught her was edible. She traded rabbit pelts in town for flour and salt and the few supplies she couldn't gather herself. The people in town knew she was living somewhere in the hills, but they didn't know where, and she didn't tell them. Edith Sorensen came to town in early December, wrapped in furs that had once belonged to Hannah's father, riding in a wagon driven by a man Hannah didn't recognize. She saw Hannah standing outside the general store, and her face twisted into an expression of surprise that quickly became contempt. "Still alive, I see. I expected the cold would have taken you by now. Sorry to disappoint you. Where are you living? The church charity house? One of the cribs behind the saloon?" Hannah smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed since October. "I have a place. Warm enough. Warmer than your house, probably." "I doubt that." Edith's eyes narrowed. "My house has a proper stove. 2 of them. I've already burned through 10 cords of wood, and it's not even Christmas." "That sounds expensive. It's comfortable, unlike whatever hole you've crawled into." Hannah didn't respond. She just kept smiling, the smile of someone who knew something that Edith didn't know, and watched her stepmother's confusion grow. Edith wanted her to be suffering. Edith needed her to be suffering, needed to know that throwing her out had consequences, that the natural order had been restored with Hannah at the bottom where she belonged. The smile said otherwise, and Edith didn't know how to process it. "You'll freeze before spring," Edith said, finally. "Mark my words, they'll find you in some ditch, stiff as a board." "Maybe, but I doubt it." The winter of 1886 to 1887 was one of the worst in territorial history. The snow started falling in November and didn't stop until March. The temperatures dropped to 30 below and stayed there for weeks at a time. Cattle froze standing up. Men got lost between their houses and their barns and weren't found until the thaw. The railroads shut down. The towns ran low on supplies. People burned furniture, fence posts, anything that would catch fire. Hannah Sorensen spent the winter in a cave that stayed 57 degrees regardless of what the weather did outside. She sealed the entrance tight, slept near the warm pool, cooked her food in the hot spring water, and waited for spring with the patience of someone who had nothing to fear from the cold. She didn't burn a single log, not one. The earth provided all the heat she needed, rising up from below in an endless supply that had been flowing since before humans walked this continent. The hot spring was her stove, her furnace, her fireplace. It asked nothing from her except that she be there to receive what it offered. Old Jim came to visit twice during the winter, checking on her, bringing supplies he had gathered from sources he didn't explain. He seemed pleased by what he found: a clean, organized living space, a woman who had adapted to cave life better than most men he had known. "You're doing good," he said on his second visit, in February. "Better than I expected. I had a good teacher. You had a starting point. The rest you figured out yourself." He accepted a cup of hot spring water, sipping it slowly. "What will you do come spring? Go back to town? Find a husband?" "I haven't decided. Maybe I'll stay here." "Nobody stays here forever. Even I left eventually, went back to town when I got too old to hunt." He looked around the cave at the improvements she had made. "But you could come back every winter, build something better each time. This place will be here long after both of us are gone." Spring came slowly, the snow melting in stages, the world outside the cave gradually returning to life. Hannah emerged in April to find a landscape transformed. rivers running high with meltwater, meadows turning green, the first wildflowers pushing up through the mud. She walked into town and learned what the winter had cost. 3 families had lost everything, burned through their savings trying to stay warm. A man had frozen in his cabin when his wood ran out, and nobody came to check on him for 3 days. The livestock losses were catastrophic. Whole herds dead, ranchers ruined, and Edith Sorensen had lost the farm. The news came from Mr. Harmon, the same man who had driven Hannah to town in October. He found her outside the general store, looking healthier than anyone who had spent the winter in the hills had any right to look. "Your stepmother's gone," he said. "Packed up and left last week. Headed back east, I think. The bank took the farm in February. She couldn't make the payments. Burned through all her money, buying firewood at winter prices. The farm is gone? Being sold at auction next month. Not that it matters to you." He looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Where did you spend the winter? Everyone thought you were dead." "I found a warm place." "Must have been something special. You look better than half the people in town." Hannah didn't explain. She just smiled the same smile she had given Edith in December, the smile of someone who knew something that others didn't, and walked away to buy supplies with money she had earned selling rabbit pelts. She didn't buy the farm at auction. She didn't have that kind of money, and anyway, she didn't want it. The farm was the past, the life she had lost when her father died. The cave was the future, a place that was hers in a way the farm had never been, given to her by a stranger who had seen something in her worth saving. She lived in that cave for 7 more winters, improving it each year, building a life that revolved around the constant heat of the hot spring. She married in 1892 a surveyor named Thomas Whitfield, who had stumbled onto the cave by accident and fallen in love with the woman who lived there. They built a proper cabin near the cave entrance, using the hot spring to heat water that flowed through pipes beneath the floor, a system that used the same principle that had kept Hannah alive that first winter. The cabin never needed a traditional stove. The hot spring did all the work, the same heat that had been rising from the earth for thousands of years, the same water that had saved a 23-year-old girl with nothing but a canvas sack and 23 cents. Old Jim Bridger died in the spring of 1889, peacefully in a room at the boarding house he had finally agreed to move into. Hannah was with him at the end, holding his hand, thanking him for the gift he had given her. "Just passing it on," he said, his voice thin but clear. "Someone showed me that cave when I was young. Now you'll show it to someone else. That's how these things work." The cave is still there, though the hot spring runs cooler now than it did in Hannah's day. The Historical Society has put up a marker near the entrance, explaining the geothermal features of the area, mentioning that early settlers sometimes used hot springs for heating. It doesn't mention Hannah Sorensen, or old Jim Bridger, or the winter of 1886 when a young woman survived without burning a single log. But the earth remembers. The spring keeps flowing, and somewhere in the steam that rises from that pool, the heat that Hannah Sorensen used to save her own life is still rising, still warming the air, still doing what it has always done since long before humans learned to take advantage of it. Some stories end with the protagonist defeating the villain. This one ends with something warmer, a woman who found heat rising from the ground and let it carry her through the coldest winter anyone could remember. If this story of underground warmth resonated with you, consider subscribing for more narratives of geothermal survival. What is the hot spring in your own life that keeps flowing regardless of the weather above? And what would happen if you built your life around it instead of fighting it?